6. That's how many Rax Roast Beef restaurants are left, scattered across Ohio and a couple of neighboring states, mostly in small towns, run independently, hanging on. 6. The number that matters more is the one from the top, 504. 504 Rax locations across 38 states, plus one in Guatemala City, at the peak in the mid-1980s. This was a genuine national fast food chain, big enough that it was neck and neck with Arby's for the roast beef crown, and plenty of people who ate at both will tell you Rax was the better one. Better beef, better sandwich. A real competitor to the brand that now has over 3,000 locations and owns the entire category. So here's the question that makes Rax worth an hour of your time. Almost every dead American chain gets killed by something external. A private equity firm loading it with debt, a competitor with a better machine, a shift in how the country eats, the ground moving under its feet. Rax had none of that. Rax wasn't strangled by a financier or out-engineered by a rival or abandoned by its customers. Rax was killed by Rax. It committed one of the slowest, strangest, most thoroughly self-inflicted suicides in the history of American fast food, and the murder weapon was an identity crisis, a company so desperate to be something more than what it was that it destroyed the thing it actually was. And at the very end, as a kind of grotesque final act, it hired a depressed, divorced, middle-aged salesman named Mr. Delicious to make jokes about his vasectomy in a roast beef commercial. We'll get to Mr. Delicious. He deserves it. But he's the punchline, not the cause. And the cause is a much better and much sadder story. A story about a company that had everything it needed to win and couldn't stop itself from throwing it away, not through bad luck or bad markets, but through a restless, fatal inability to be satisfied with being good at the one thing it was good at. Start in Springfield, Ohio in 1967. A man named Jack Roshman opens a roast beef restaurant and calls it Jack's. Roast beef sandwiches, simple menu, the whole thing built around one good idea done well. And the timing is important, because this is the exact moment the roast beef fast food category is being born. Arby's had opened in 1964, 3 years earlier, in nearby Ohio, on the same fundamental concept. Thin, sliced roast beef on a bun, a step up from the burger joints, a slightly more grown-up fast food sandwich. Jack's and Arby's were siblings, born in the same state within a few years of each other, chasing the same idea. And here's the thing that gets lost in the story of what came later. The roast beef itself was legitimately good. This wasn't a gimmick chain. People who ate at Rax in its prime are still, decades later, online defending the beef, insisting it was better than Arby's, describing the sandwich with the specific ache of someone remembering a food they can't get anymore. The core product was real. The foundation was solid. Everything that eventually went wrong on top of a genuinely good sandwich, which is part of what makes it a tragedy instead of just a failure. Rax didn't die because the food was bad. It died despite the food being good, which is a much harder thing to do. The early ownership history is a tangle, and it matters less than what came after, so I'll move through it fast. Roshman sold Jack's to General Foods in 1969, the packaged goods giant, which also owned Burger Chef at the time. And General Foods renamed it Rax and mostly ran it into the ground, closing most of the restaurants by 1972 and leaving about 10 franchised units standing. Those surviving units got picked up by a company called the Restaurant Administration Corporation, which had connections to the Wendy's world and saw potential in roast beef. In 1977, they rebranded the whole thing Rax. And this is where the real story starts, because this is where Rax began to grow. And grow it did. Through the late 70s and into the 80s, Rax expanded fast and expanded smart. By the early 1980s, it had climbed to over 220 restaurants across 25 states, and it did it with a strategy that was, at the start, exactly right. Rax knew what it was. It built its locations in working-class areas across the Midwest. Regular towns, regular people, regular prices. The menu was tight and focused. Roast beef sandwiches, salads, baked potatoes. Do one thing. Do it well. Sell it to ordinary people at a fair price in the parts of the country where ordinary people live. That was the formula, and the formula worked. And Rax rode it from 10 scraped-together units to a serious national chain in about a decade. At its core, early Rax understood its own identity perfectly. It was the good roast beef place for working families. Not fancy, not trying to be everything, just genuinely good beef, a clean, simple menu, and a clear sense of exactly who it was for. That clarity was its superpower. A customer knew precisely what Rax was and precisely why they were going there, and that knowledge is worth more in the restaurant business than almost anything else, because it's what turns a first visit into a habit and a habit into a chain of 220 stores. And the working-class Midwest strategy was smarter than it might sound, because it was a real competitive insight, not just a default. The big coastal markets and the flashy suburbs were where every chain wanted to be, where the competition was fiercest and the rents were highest. Rax planted itself in the regular towns of Ohio and Indiana and Kentucky and the rest of the Midwest, the places with steady blue-collar populations, honest appetites, and less competition for a good affordable sandwich. It was meeting a real demand in markets other chains underserved, with a product those customers genuinely preferred at a price they could pay any day of the week. That's a durable position. That's the kind of unglamorous, well-defended niche that a company can hold and grow from for decades if it just has the discipline to keep holding it. Rax had found a lane and owned it. The tragedy is that owning a lane wasn't enough for the people running the company. They wanted the whole highway, and in reaching for it, they drove straight off the road. Then came the money, and the money is where it all went wrong. By the mid-1980s, Rax was a success, and success attracts capital. The company got flush, investment cash flowing in, the brand riding high, celebrity endorsements, flashy commercials, all-you-can-eat salads, real momentum. In 1985, it genuinely looked like Rax had arrived, like it was about to make the leap from strong regional competitor to national heavyweight. A true rival to Arby's from coast to coast. It had the beef, it had the growth, it had the cash. Everything was lined up. And this is the exact moment Rax lost its mind. There's a specific trap that catches successful companies, and Rax walked straight into the center of it, so it's worth naming. When a business is struggling, discipline is forced on it. You can't afford to experiment. You have to focus on what works, or you die. But when a business becomes successful and the money starts flowing, that discipline evaporates, and a dangerous new feeling takes its place. The feeling that you've figured it out, that you're smart, that the success proves you can do anything, that the winning formula is just a floor to build wild new things on top of, rather than the whole reason you're winning. Money doesn't just fund good decisions. It funds bad ones too. And it funds them enthusiastically, because now you can afford to be wrong in expensive ways. A struggling Rax could never have built a solarium or launched a Chinese food menu. It wouldn't have had the cash, and the discipline of scarcity would have kept it focused on the beef. It was precisely success that gave Rax the money and the confidence to destroy itself. The investment cash that looked like the fuel for its rise turned out to be the fuel for its self-immolation. Because flush with all that investment money, the company did not do the boring, correct thing, which would have been to keep doing what was working, build more of the same good roast beef restaurants in more working-class towns, defend the core, execute the formula, out Arby's on quality. Instead, the money stimulated a flood of new ideas, and the operative word is flood. Rax looked at its own success and decided its success wasn't enough. It decided it wanted to be bigger than a roast beef chain. It wanted to be everything, for everyone, and it wanted it all at once. And in the space of a few short years, it methodically dismantled every single thing that had made it work. Start with the menu, because the menu is where the identity crisis became visible on the tray in front of you. Rax was a roast beef restaurant. That was the entire proposition, the thing the name promised, the reason anyone came. And in the mid-80s, Rax decided that roast beef wasn't enough and began cramming its menu with food that had nothing whatsoever to do with roast beef. First a salad bar, then a whole expansive food bar, then pizza, then, and this is real, Chinese food. Then, according to one of its own commercials, something called taco pockets. Pizza, Chinese food, tacos, and roast beef all under one roof at a place with the word roast beef in its name. Some of this had a logic on paper, which is what makes it instructive rather than just stupid. The salad bar, for instance, was a response to a real trend. The 80s were when America started getting health conscious, when salad bar was a genuine draw and heavy roast beef started to feel to some diners like the old unhealthy way of eating. So you can see the meeting where someone said the roast beef sandwich is aging, the culture is moving toward lighter food, we need to get ahead of it. That's not a crazy thought. Plenty of chains added salad bars in that era. But there's a difference between adding one complimentary thing that fits, a salad bar alongside your sandwich is fine, and using it as the first domino in a total abandonment of your identity. Rax didn't add a salad bar and stop. It added a salad bar, then a food bar, then pizza, then Chinese food, then taco pockets, each new addition justified by some plausible-sounding trend, until the cumulative effect was a restaurant that had forgotten its own name. The individual decisions each had a rationale. The sum of them was suicide. Think about what that does to a customer. You built a chain of 220 stores on the promise, "We are the good roast beef place." People came because they wanted a specific thing and knew you did it well. And now they walk in and the menu is a chaotic bazaar of pizza and lo mein and taco pockets, and the roast beef, the actual point, is one option among a dozen unrelated ones. The clarity is gone. The whole reason to choose Rax over anywhere else, we do this one thing better than anyone, has been diluted into we do a lot of things, none of them especially well. And by the way, we're technically a roast beef place. You can't be the best at roast beef and also sell Chinese food. The two ideas fight each other. Nobody drives to a roast beef restaurant craving Chinese food, and nobody trusts the Chinese food at a roast beef restaurant, so you've added cost and complexity and confusion and gained nothing but a diluted brand. Menu bloat is one of the most reliable ways to kill a fast food chain, and it kills for concrete operational reasons, not just branding ones. Every new item is more inventory, more prep, more training, more equipment, more ways for the kitchen to slow down and screw up. A tight menu is fast and consistent because the staff makes the same few things 1,000 times and gets very good at them. A bloated menu is slow and inconsistent because the staff is juggling pizza ovens and woks and roast beef slicers and taco assembly all at once, and the quality of everything sags under the weight of the variety. Rax took a lean, focused, fast operation and turned it into a confused everything store. And it did this deliberately with investment money, believing it was growing when it was actually rotting from the inside. But the menu was only half of it. Because at the same time Rax was betraying its menu, it was betraying its customers. Rax had been built for working-class Midwestern families. That was the base. That was who filled the seats, who made the chain, who loved the beef. And in the mid-80s, drunk on success and capital, Rax decided it didn't want to be a working-class restaurant anymore. It wanted to be upscale. It wanted to be a fancy place to eat, an aspirational fast food experience, a step above. So it remodeled. Rax poured money into overhauling its restaurants, ripping out the familiar simple dining rooms and installing, and again, this is real, solariums, glass-walled sunrooms, fancy wood paneling. The company was trying to physically transform a roast beef fast food joint into something that felt like a nicer, classier, more grown-up sit-down establishment. Ferns and wood and glass and light, an ambiance, a vibe, a whole aspirational atmosphere bolted onto a chain whose entire reason for existing was cheap, good beef for regular people. And this was catastrophic in two directions at once, which is the special genius of the blunder. In one direction, it alienated the base. The working-class families who were the heart of Rax's business looked at the new fancy solarium and wood paneling racks and did not feel welcomed and elevated. They felt pushed out. This wasn't their place anymore. It was trying to be something they weren't there for, something that came with the unspoken message that the old, simple, honest roast beef joint they'd loved wasn't good enough, and by extension, neither were they. You do not repay loyal working-class customers by remodeling their restaurant to make it feel fancy. You just tell them in the language of ferns and glass that you'd prefer a different clientele, and they hear it and they leave. In the other direction, and this is the part that's almost funny, the upscale play could never possibly work because of the menu. Set aside for a second whether a fast food chain can ever really go upscale. Even granting the attempt, ask yourself, what is the fancy, aspirational, high-class night out that Rax was offering in its beautiful new solarium? Chinese food, taco pockets, pizza, from a roast beef restaurant. Nobody on earth associates a classy evening with lo mein served at a roast beef counter under a fern. The upscale remodel and the everything menu didn't just each fail on their own. They actively made each other more absurd. The fancy room made the chaotic down-market menu look ridiculous, and the chaotic menu made the fancy room look delusional. Rax spent enormous money engineering a contradiction, a place that was simultaneously trying to be a fine dining solarium and a food court everything stall, and the two halves canceled each other out into pure confusion. This is the thing that never sat right with me about the Rax story, and it's worth saying plainly because it's the whole lesson. Rax didn't fail because it ran out of ideas. It failed because it had too many, all at once, none of them disciplined, all of them pointed away from what it actually was. Every one of these moves, the salad bar, the Chinese food, the pizza, the taco pockets, the solariums, the upscaling, came from the same root impulse, which was a company that had become successful and then decided that success wasn't enough, that being the best roast beef chain in the Midwest was somehow beneath it, that it needed to be bigger and fancier and more than itself. And in chasing more than itself, it stopped being itself, and once it stopped being itself, there was no reason for anyone to choose it. A restaurant that is trying to be everything is, in the customer's mind, nothing in particular. Rax talked itself out of its own identity, spent millions of dollars doing it, and called the whole self-destruction growth. Meanwhile, Arby's, the sibling, the direct competitor, the other roast beef chain born in Ohio in the 60s, did the opposite. Arby's stayed a roast beef chain. It knew what it was. It kept its identity clear. This is where you go for roast beef. It didn't try to become a fancy Chinese food solarium. It defended the core, executed the formula, and kept its promise to the customer simple and legible. And while Rax was busy dismantling itself in an orgy of reinvention, Arby's just kept being Arby's and pulled steadily ahead and never looked back. Today, Arby's has over 3,000 locations and is the undisputed name in roast beef. Rax has 6. Same category, same era, same state, same starting sandwich. And the difference between 3,000 and 6 comes down almost entirely to one company that knew what it was and one that couldn't stand being what it was. The Arby's comparison is the single most damning fact in the whole Rax story, and it's worth dwelling on because it removes every possible excuse. If roast beef fast food had been a doomed category, if America had simply stopped wanting roast beef sandwiches, then both chains would have died, and Rax's collapse would be a story about a changing world. But America did not stop wanting roast beef. Arby's is proof, 3,000 locations of proof sitting right there. The demand Rax was built to serve not only survived but grew enormously over the exact decades Rax was shrinking. Rax wasn't killed by a shift in tastes because the chain doing the same thing didn't just survive the shift, it thrived through it. Rax wasn't killed by a superior product because by many accounts Rax's beef was as good or better. Rax wasn't killed by lack of demand or lack of a proven model or lack of a good sandwich. It had all of those. Arby's had the same things and turned them into an empire. The only variable that differed was discipline, the willingness to stay what you are and get better at it, rather than the compulsion to become something else. Arby's had that discipline. Rax didn't. That's the whole difference, and it cost Rax roughly 2,994 locations. By the mid-'80s, the damage was already deep. The menu experiments had bloated operations and confused customers. The upscale remodels had cost a fortune and driven off the base. The clear, powerful, money-making identity that had carried Rax from 10 units to over 500 had been methodically erased by its own management. And in late 1986, just as all these misadventures were curdling, Rax filed for bankruptcy the first time. And here's a piece that often gets lost under the colorful stuff, the taco pockets and the solariums and the depressed mascot. But that mattered enormously. All of this reinvention cost real money, and the money is a big part of what actually killed the company. Solariums and wood paneling and total restaurant overhauls aren't cheap. Remodeling hundreds of locations is a massive capital outlay. Adding pizza ovens and Chinese food capability and expansive food bars means new equipment, new supply chains, new training, new everything across the whole chain. Rax spent lavishly to make itself worse. It poured its investment cash and then borrowed on top of it to fund an identity crisis. And when the identity crisis drove away customers and revenue softened, the company was left holding the enormous cost of all that reinvention with less money coming in to cover it. The menu experiments didn't just confuse the brand, they hemorrhaged cash. The remodels didn't just alienate the base, they loaded the balance sheet. So when the bankruptcies came, they came from both directions at once. Falling revenue from a confused, alienated customer base, and rising costs from an expensive spree of self-sabotage. The reinvention was financially ruinous and strategically suicidal at the same time, which is a rare and impressive way to fail. That should have been the wake-up call. In a sense it was. The first bankruptcy is where the peak-era Rax, the 504-store colossus, began its real contraction. But the company didn't fully learn the lesson, and the deepest strangeness of the Rax story is still ahead, because the single most self-destructive thing Rax ever did came later, in 1992, when a struggling roast beef chain desperate to win back customers decided the way to do it was to make them profoundly uncomfortable. Mr. Delicious. In 1992, Rax launched an advertising campaign built around a mascot. But not a mascot in any sense you're picturing. Not a cartoon animal. Not a friendly, cheerful character. Not a smiling roast beef sandwich with arms. Mr. Delicious was a man. A middle-aged man in a plain monochrome suit, an ordinary, sad-looking guy. And the entire concept of the campaign was that this man was depressed. The ads worked like this. Mr. Delicious would appear, open with a deadpan, "Well, hello," and then, in a flat, weary, defeated voice, deliver a monologue that was less a food commercial than a portrait of a man in the grip of a midlife crisis. He talked about his miserable love life. He talked about his marriage to Mrs. Delicious being on the rocks. He referenced his poor past career choices, a recent bender and the hangover from it, and, in ads for a roast beef restaurant aimed at hungry people, his recovery from a vasectomy, or maybe hemorrhoids. The ads were coy about which. He'd drop uncomfortable innuendo. He'd make sardonic references to the marketing team back at Rax Corporate, breaking the fourth wall to remind you that this whole thing was cynical and he knew it. And somewhere in the fog of his neurotic self-loathing, almost as an afterthought, he'd note, with the enthusiasm of a man reading his own obituary that yes, you can eat at Rax. He ended each spot with a limp little diggity-dee. The stated theory, and it's hard to believe a company committed to this, but they did, was that Mr. Delicious's edgy, adult, miserable attitude would help draw in customers. The idea was that his relentless cynicism and self-pity would read as sophisticated, grown-up in on the joke, a fast food mascot for adults who were too cool for a smiling cartoon. It was aimed, in theory, at that older working demographic Rax kept trying and failing to court. And look at what the campaign reveals about the state of the company by 1992, because that's the real value of Mr. Delicious. He's an X-ray. By this point, Rax had spent years failing to figure out who it was. It had abandoned the working-class base with the upscale remodels, confused everyone with the everything menu, gone through one bankruptcy, and was flailing for any idea that might work. And when a company in that state reaches for a solution, it doesn't reach for the obvious, disciplined, boring answer. Go back to being a good roast beef place, make the sandwich, sell it cheap, tell people it's good. It reaches for something clever, something that'll get attention, something that'll make people talk. Mr. Delicious was a bid for buzz from a company that had lost the ability to just be good, a swing for edgy relevance from an outfit that couldn't remember how to be simply, appealingly itself. Desperate companies confuse being talked about with being wanted, and Mr. Delicious got Rax talked about as a punchline. He generated attention the way a car crash generates attention, which is not the kind that sells sandwiches. It did not work. Of course it did not work. There is a reason food advertising is relentlessly, almost aggressively cheerful, because the entire goal is to make you associate the product with pleasure, appetite, warmth, happiness, the desire to eat. And Mr. Delicious achieved the exact opposite. He associated Rax with divorce, hangovers, medical procedures below the belt, career regret, and the specific gray flavor of a man's life quietly falling apart. You cannot make people hungry by making them sad. You cannot sell a roast beef sandwich by having a depressed divorcee mumble about his vasectomy at them. The campaign wasn't appetizing. It was uncomfortable. A cry for help wearing a suit, standing in a restaurant, failing to sell you a sandwich. There's a wrinkle worth being fair about. A lot of people who've revisited Mr. Delicious decades later argue that the campaign was ahead of its time, that its deadpan, cynical, anti-advertising tone is exactly the kind of thing that goes viral now, the kind of ironic, self-aware humor that brands like Old Spice or Wendy's social media would later mine for gold. And there's something to that. Watched today, with modern eyes, Mr. Delicious is genuinely funny in a bleak, absurd way. But being ahead of your time is just another way of being wrong for your time. And in 1992, to a mainstream fast food audience that had come for a roast beef sandwich and no self-loathing, it landed as what it was, a bizarre, alienating middle finger to the company's own remaining customers. The timing tells the story. Rax rolled out Mr. Delicious, and roughly 3 months later, in November 1992, Rax Restaurants filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, the second bankruptcy. I want to be careful here because it would be easy and satisfying to say Mr. Delicious killed Rax, and that's not quite true, and the truth is more interesting. Mr. Delicious didn't kill Rax. The chain was already dying, already deep into the damage from the menu chaos and the upscale disaster and the first bankruptcy, already bleeding the customers and the identity it had spent the 80s destroying. Mr. Delicious wasn't the cause of death. He was the symptom. The final, perfect, almost poetic symptom of a company that no longer had any idea what it was or who it was for. A confident brand that knows its identity doesn't hire a depressed salesman to insult its customers about vasectomies. Only a company in the last stages of an identity crisis, flailing, desperate, out of ideas, willing to try literally anything, does that. Mr. Delicious was what the disease looked like at the end. He didn't cause the fever. He was the fever. After the 1992 bankruptcy, the story becomes a long, grinding, unglamorous death, the slow part of the slow death. The company tried to save itself through the one move that so often shows up at the end of these stories, a deal with a bigger player. In 1994, Rax entered into an agreement to convert many of its locations into Hardee's, essentially agreeing to stop being Rax, to surrender the brand and become somebody else's restaurants. It was an admission, really, that the Rax name and concept were no longer viable enough to stand on their own. But even the surrender failed. The company, by then operating as Heartland Food Systems, found the conversions difficult and expensive, and the whole arrangement collapsed into yet another bankruptcy in 1996, the third. The Hardee's units got sold off. The company changed its name back to Rax Restaurants, and the great national chain that had once had over 500 locations was reduced to fewer than 100 and falling. There's a bleak symmetry in that Hardee's deal that's worth pausing on. Rax had spent the 80s destroying its own identity, trying to be Chinese food, trying to be upscale, trying to be an edgy adult brand, trying to be anything other than a roast beef chain. And when it finally hit bottom, the last-ditch plan was to complete the erasure by literally turning its restaurants into a different brand entirely, to stop being Rax in the most total way possible. A company that had spent a decade unable to accept what it was ended its arc by agreeing to become someone else, and couldn't even manage that. It failed at being itself, and then it failed at not being itself. That's about as complete an identity collapse as a business can suffer. It could neither live as what it was, nor successfully transform into something else, so it just fractured and shrank, unable to be anything at all. From there, it was just entropy. Bankruptcy forced the closure of the corporate-owned locations. The surviving restaurants were mostly independently owned franchises, and those shuttered one by one over the years, a location here, a location there, each closing a small local event that meant something to the regulars in that one town and nothing to anyone else. In 1997, the shrunken brand was bought by Cassidy and Associates. A West Virginia location closed in 2016. The company's headquarters ended up in Ironton, Ohio, a small town on the river, and the count kept dropping, under 100, then to a few dozen, then to a scattering, then to single digits, until it reached where it sits today. Six independently owned Rax Roast Beef restaurants in Ohio and Illinois and Kentucky, run by people who love the brand enough to keep it alive, serving the same genuinely good roast beef that the company spent the 80s forgetting was the whole point. Those 6 are worth pausing on because they're the proof of what the company threw away. The reason they survive is that they're run by operators who understood the one thing corporate never could, that Rax was a roast beef place, and its job was to make good roast beef for regular people. No solariums, no taco pockets, no depressed mascot. Just the sandwich the whole thing was built on, made well, sold at a fair price to the working families who were always the real customers. The formula that carried Rax to 504 locations still works. It's still working right now in 6 small towns. It was never the formula that failed. It was the company's inability to leave the formula alone. Here's what I keep coming back to. Rax is the rarest kind of business death because it wasn't murdered. It wasn't strangled by debt or crushed by a superior competitor or made obsolete by a changing world. Arby's proves the concept was sound. Same sandwich, same era. Over 3,000 locations today. The roast beef fast food chain built on good beef and a clear identity was a fundamentally winning idea. And Rax had it. Had it early. Had it better than most. Had 504 locations worth of proof that it worked. Everything Rax needed to become Arby's, it already had. The beef was better. The base was loyal. The growth was real. And it threw it all away on purpose, out of a kind of restlessness that I think is deeply, recognizably human. Rax couldn't stand being what it was. Being a good roast beef chain for working families wasn't enough. It wanted to be fancier, broader, more sophisticated, more than a roast beef place. And every single move it made in pursuit of being more than itself made it less than itself, until it was nothing at all. The menu that tried to be everything became a menu about nothing. The remodel that tried to be upscale alienated the down-to-earth customers who were its whole business. The mascot that tried to be edgy and adult became a monument to a company that had lost the ability to simply, cheerfully say, "We make good roast beef. Come eat it." That's the whole tragedy in a sentence. Rax knew how to make a great roast beef sandwich and sell it to the people who wanted it, and it could not leave that alone. It had a good thing, a genuinely, provably good thing. And it could not stop trying to make it into a different thing, and in the trying, it destroyed the good thing and never built the different thing, and ended up with neither. 504 locations, dismantled from the inside by a company at war with its own identity in the name of an ambition that mistook self-destruction for growth. And there's a lesson in it that reaches well past roast beef, because the impulse that killed Rax is one of the most human impulses there is. It's the restlessness of having something good and not being able to sit still with it. It's the voice that says, what you are isn't enough, that you should be more, bigger, fancier, different. The voice that turns a person who's good at one thing into a person who's mediocre at 5. That turns a business that owns a niche into a business that owns nothing. Discipline, in the end, is mostly the ability to resist that voice. To look at a good roast beef sandwich selling well to happy customers and say, this is enough. Let's just do more of this. Let's get better at exactly this. That sounds easy. It is apparently one of the hardest things in all of business because the companies that master it, the Arbys of the world, the ones that stay stubbornly, boringly themselves for decades, become empires, and the companies that can't, the restless, clever ones always reaching for the next reinvention, end up as 6 locations in small-town Ohio and a cautionary tale. Arby's stayed Arby's and got 3,000 stores. Rax refused to stay Rax and got 6. In one of those 6 tonight, somewhere in small-town Ohio, someone is ordering a roast beef sandwich, and it's good. As good as it ever was, because the beef was never the problem. The beef was the answer the whole time. The company just spent a decade and a half and 3 bankruptcies and 1 depressed salesman named Mr. Delicious failing to hear it. Well, hello. Yes, you can still eat at Rax. 6 places left, and the sandwich is still the best thing on the menu, the way it always was, the way it always should have stayed. Diggity-dee.